And it looks like we are live. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, especially for Lone, where it is evening for him. I'm Aaron Sheehan, Director of Competitive Strategy at BigCommerce. And today we're going to be talking about headless commerce, composable. What is that about? What does it mean? What is it for? And how can merchants set themselves up for success when they are embarking on a headless or composable project? BigCommerce, of course, is a proud member of the Lock Alliance, which advocates for a best-of-breed approach to enterprise technology, and we have the most headless builds of any member of the Lock Alliance. I'd like to introduce the folks who will be joining this stream today. We'll start with our guest from the furthest away, Mr. Lone. Lone, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me, guys. Lone Laux, Director of Headless Engineering at Trellis. Been growing Trellis into a lot more of a headless agency recently. It was brought on from an acquisition deal last year, actually last December. And yeah, it's been a ride so far, and really excited to chat with you guys.
Fantastic. Where are you joining us from, Lone?
From Dubai in the UAE. So
very cool.
Quite a bit of time difference.
Yeah, you said it was about what 7:50, 8 o'clock p.m.
Yeah,
for you?
it's 8 p.m. over here. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we appreciate your flexibility. And then I guess the next closest would be Ben. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Ben Ackles. I'm a product marketing manager for Headless Developer Experience here at BigCommerce, and I'm calling in from Austin, Texas, which is where we're headquartered, although we're distributed, as Aaron will describe.
Yes, I'm right. And I am not in Austin, Texas, nor am I in Dubai. I am in Springfield, Missouri, in the beautiful Ozark Mountains, just like the TV show. It's almost exactly like that. So I think the first thing we probably need to do, this is the question that I get asked, I think more than any other, is what is headless and what is composable? Is there a difference between them? There's a lot of vendor jargon like thrown around from various analysts and various software vendors, and we're probably as guilty as anybody else. So Ben, this is literally your job. What to find these terms for us? What is headless and what is composable and what's the difference?
Sure. So there's been a lot of confusion. There's a lot of interchangeable use of the words. So that causes a lot of confusion in the market too, as people try and understand headless first, and then understanding now we're talking about composable. Well, what is it? How's it different from headless? Is it different from headless, or is it just another a replacement term? And the way that I look at headless is a decoupling of front end from back end, and then composable is a more all-encompassing, like the splitting of components and trying to make sure that these components work together. That they're allowing, headless CMS, or we'll talk about it in a second, but DXCs, making sure that these systems are orchestrated well and they're kind of speaking to each other. So it's a little bit more like headless is just a subset of a larger composable story.
Got it. Absolutely right. Lone, anything to add to that? Is that pretty accurate as you understand it at Trellis, or would you have a different nuance?
That is pretty accurate, yeah. And I would say in my definition, composable could mean a whole bunch of things. It could be could be on the front end, could be on the back end. We see a lot of headless builds that involve building a middleware for the back end portion that connects a whole bunch of APIs together when you need to combine data from like a dozen different data sources and APIs. It becomes pretty helpful to build a middleware, and that to me would also fall within the definition of composable. It's just composable on the back end, composable on the front end, just two different things. So yeah, that's
perfect.
Pretty accurate.
Perfect. So I want to ask you this question, Lone. So I know we've obviously talked before. You're a French citizen. You live in Dubai. You're working for a U.S. company. So you have a very broad perspective, I think, globally on how online merchants build and sell, wherever they are in the world. So I'm curious what you see as the motivating factors for choosing a headless approach to the e-commerce platform, and or, as we said, maybe even looking broader at a more composable approach for merchants. And then maybe as a secondary question to that, so what are the motivating factors are those different in your opinion from what you see from talking to people in different parts of the world?
Slightly different, I would say. Obviously in my part of the world, in the Middle East and Asia in general, and you also see that a lot in Africa, is you see a lot of interest around mobile experiences in general, and having extremely fast and interactive experiences, even on the smallest screens. That is really, generally speaking, the focus of the region that we see a little bit less, in the US and in Europe. I would assume you probably see the same thing in South America, and you often see, and that's, by the way, the reason we're going away from e-commerce a little bit, but that's the reason why Facebook and Twitter, etc., all have light versions of their apps for these regions specifically, is for that exact reason, because they want to provide an awesome lightweight experience that can work on any type of mobile network, etc., and on the go. And that's what we're seeing for e-commerce as well. We're seeing a lot of demand for lightweight, very high performance headless storefronts that make use of PWA standards, with caching, with service workers, etc. Push notifications built into the web experience directly without having to install an app. That's the kind of things that I'm seeing over here, as well as in general, multi-channel, which can mean a whole lot of different things around here than what you see in the US. We have a lot of demand for chatbot, selling channels, for example. So people use WhatsApp a lot over here. You see that all across the Middle East. You see that a lot in India, for example, and Pakistan, and all this part of the world. And in China, obviously more WeChat. But the demand is basically the same from the market, is to enable retailers to sell on chatbots through these platforms. Maybe WhatsApp, maybe Telegram, or WeChat. And for that, you obviously need a very flexible e-commerce backend that allows for headless and allows for multi-channel.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I totally agree with that. I might add also, speaking more broadly of composability, there's a lot of interest. I've heard from merchants who are looking for best of breed. They're wanting to assemble a set of very specific solutions to commerce problems, channel needs that they have, where trying to go all in one on a single application that's maybe second or third best at like everything. They want the best solution for, maybe they have a specific vertical that they're in, or the specific part of the world that they're in, or even they've got a very specific like internal tech stack and they can only work with it in certain ways. And so it gives you a lot more freedom to sort of build the right solution in an omni-channel way for a best of breed set. So Ben, I want to give you a chance to pick Loan's brain. He's obviously the expert here. What's on your mind? What would you like to ask him?
So we often do these interviews with agencies, and I think that agencies have like a very unique perspective on the merchant. We're not myself. I'm not always speaking to merchants. I might be speaking through an intermediary. But what do you find that about the merchants when they come to you, and you might they might end up going composable or headless, but from the merchant's perspective, who is advocating for going headless or composable? Like, are they asking explicitly for it? And what's driving that conversation?
Well, you see a little bit of everything, but in general, I would say CTOs are usually the driving factor behind this decision. Obviously, it would make sense, right, that organizations that are more likely to go for a headless approach will usually be companies that already have a certain history with e-commerce platforms, that they might be frustrated with the headful approaches, and might want to give headless a try, because they have a CRM, they have an ERP, they have a WMS, and they have a whole bunch of things that they want to connect to. Plus, they need multiple storefronts for different markets, etc. So the only approach is obviously headless. And usually, when you're at this scale, you obviously have a CTO in place, and you'll have somebody who will be able to kind of speak technical to the team at the agency. So that's what we're seeing the most. But I would say sometimes it's also even the developers and the engineering managers within the development teams at the retailer, when they have in-house development teams, we're seeing a lot of advocacy for that, because obviously it makes the developer's job way easier to have a composable architecture where you have APIs that you can consume. There's separate code bases for each piece of the puzzle. So we're seeing a lot of that. But more and more these days, we're seeing headless being brought up by strategy people and C-levels and directors that are not necessarily technical, and just shows you how much of an interest there is out there on in the market for headless commerce. So a little bit of everything is the answer, really.
Yep, looks like we have a question coming in as well from James. What are the main benefits of headless versus non-headless? I think we talked about this a little bit in terms of better mobile experience, as well as being able to sort of assemble a best of breed suite. I might say I've worked with some fashion brands who are going this route. I would say more control over the front end experience is something that's come up in a number of conversations that I've been a part of working with merchants, where if you work with an e-commerce platform, like a highly coupled one, and BigCommerce has this option, but I'm thinking of like a Magento or a Salesforce Commerce Cloud, right? Those applications all create templates. They build templates in HTML that render pages on the front end, and they're very tightly coupled with your content authoring and product data in the back end. So I make changes to my content, I make changes to product data in the back end, and it immediately reflects on the front end, which is cool. The challenge is that, especially if you're a very brand first company, or you want a lot of control over, you want each product to look differently digitally, or you want your homepage to be very, very customized in some way. If what you want doesn't fit inside the pre-built templates that e-commerce platforms have to build, then you're going to get a lot more out of a headless or composable architecture, because it's going to enable you to approach each page from a white sheet of paper at some level. You are fetching the data via API from your headless backend e-commerce system, and you have complete control over the front. Your developers are very empowered to use whatever tools they want to build the kind of experience that you need. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of composable, is that it lifts you out of template land. I want to follow on because I'm very interested in the technology space here, because there's been so much movement. There's so many vendors now. I think Gartner released their hype cycle, where it sort of like breaks down all the different new terms that are being invented all the time. I kind of want to get Lone, what's your opinion? Like, what are some products in the mock alliance or in the headless space that you're particularly interested in? And I'm interested in sort of your dev toolkit, right? Like, what are the tools that you reach for when you're building a site for a merchant today? And are there new tools that are coming up that you're interested in?
Well, I'm very bullish on Vercel and Next.js in general. I actually have a very strong preference as far as open source platform agnostic headless storefronts go. That's a mouthful, but I swear each of these words actually means something. I have a strong preference, for Next.commerce, which we've been using for the better part of 2 years at Trellis, with great success on all of our builds. It's really been a treat to work with for developers. They really enjoy the development experience, just because they have all the tools they need to really build fast. And the build process is amazing. The tooling in general, it's got strong typing for the more technically inclined people watching the live stream. It's built on TypeScript. It's just a great suite of software to build a headless storefront with. So that would be my open source non-product answer. And as far as actual commercial products and commercial platforms go, I would say I'm very interested, and I've been watching very closely what Shogun Frontend and Builder.io have been doing recently. I think they're both leading the way towards a more user-friendly, headless approach for, you could say, less technically inclined, especially in the case of Shogun frontend, less technically inclined clients. Builder.io is more of a developer tool, really, but they both enable kind of the same experiences, right? And they give a lot more control to the end user at the retailer, on the back office. I think that these two are really interesting and very promising solutions, and they're already gaining crazy traction.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And Shogun's been interesting to watch over the years, their evolution, right? Because when I started interacting with Shogun 4 or 5 years ago, it was before sort of headless and composable was really, I think, gaining the popularity that it has now. And they were, almost more of a storefront widget builder, but watching their evolution as they take on more and more pieces of the technology stack has been fascinating. We had a question come in, and this actually, I think, has been asked a couple of times in the chat from what I can see. Either the disadvantages of composable commerce or common objections for choosing headless. Yeah, right. So I'll start with a couple that I've heard when I'm giving advice to folks. And I've spent most of my e-commerce career actually on the agency side, sort of working with merchants on like competing with you, Lo, on e-commerce builds, competing with Trellis. I think one of the disadvantages of it is the RFP cycle, the procurement side. So I'll put on the business hat for a moment and say that one of the nice things about picking one vendor to solve your front end and your back end is that you only have to go through one RFP process if you're a merchant, and you're going through one procurement process to sign a license. And so if I buy, a platform that is highly opinionated suite, and it does everything I need it to do, I pay one license fee to them and I'm done. It can be more complex from a business operations standpoint to do that in a composable land where you're going to be evaluating multiple fit for purpose vendors for specific reasons. And then, you're going to make separate evaluations where you're evaluating the right digital experience platform or CMS against other CMSs, or I'm evaluating the right e-commerce platform against other e-commerce platforms. I may be evaluating tools like Shogun or Builder.io, and there's so many in the space. And it requires you to be pretty mature on your technology side as a merchant. It's not the easiest, simplest path to go through. Ben and Lone, kick it back to you guys in terms of common objections that you hear or disadvantages of composability. What would be something that comes to mind for you guys?
I think when people decide to go headless, you really have to be prepared. You have to have the resources to actually pursue it and to be really effective in it. So you really need to work with an agency or have a really solid development team. So going headless, you kind of you need to be prepared. And the other thing is, when people do this with us, we have kind of a where you can graduate to headless. I think that's it's not, you don't have to go headless to start. It's a way of like moving and evolving and having this more like incremental improvement to headless. If you're going to be growing fast, if you're going to have a dynamic experience, you're going to need that inevitably. Growing brands, or if you're a large brand already, you probably should be going first headless. But in our case, we have the benefit of having two approaches, and that allows a lot of merchants to really incrementally adopt. But again, it's not really for everyone. And if you're an SMB, probably deeply consider just going with a monolithic approach too, because you'll get everything out of the box. Like you said, that single contract, it's a lot easier as far as the working with multiple vendors. Working with a single vendor obviously is a lot more straightforward. Lone, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing. The best headless builds that we see at Trellis are from merchants who have actually outgrown their legacy solution. And that is just super important to understand for retailers, because they hear all these buzzwords, headless, you got to be in headless. And they, most of them without a technical team don't really know what it really takes to get into the headless space. And, then they end up, being disappointed when they hear that, the budget is 10 times what it is for a head full build. They, end up being surprised when, they have to sign agreements with half a dozen API providers to make anything happen, that the dev process will take at least 6 months to build a storefront. It is just a lot of disappointments for, vendors that are retailers that are not prepared for the headless world. So I think before considering headless, establish whether you've outgrown your current platform or not. You might have some room to grow still, and I think that's really the most important part to consider, really, for anyone considering headless.
Perfect. And I know we're over on time here, but there's some really great questions coming in. So I'd like to keep going if you guys are okay with it.
Sure thing.
Perfect. So Aaron, great name, by the way, Aaron, big fan of the name. How are remote user testing and analytics tracking impacted by headless? No impact, minimal impact. I have thoughts on this. Lone, maybe I'll pass that to you to see what you would see from a practitioner standpoint, because it's been a little bit since I've dug into this.
Sure.
So I know what it was like a while back, but I don't know what it's like today.
I'll give my favorite answer. It depends.
It depends.
I'm sorry, guys, but that's just the truth, right? It depends. It depends how well that was implemented by your development team. That's just how it is with headless. And by the way, that's a common theme. If you get into the headless space as a retailer, you'll notice that a lot of it depends on the implementation. So you have a lot of great APIs for analytics tracking, for stats and even just solutions that full on allow you to spy on your users, like Full Story, for example. Very, very, very cool stuff in the headless space. But, again, each integration will be an extra item on the to-do list for your team. And it depends if you have the budget to implement it, if you are fine paying for, like 3 or 4 different analytics APIs that might each, give you that little bit of functionality that you're after. The answer is that everything is doable, and you can get very, very, very granular data on your customers with a headless storefront. You can really make anything happen. And a lot, obviously with a lot more control than a headful experience, as we've said, as you've said, Aaron. But it all comes obviously with extra budget for the development phase.
Yep, couldn't agree more with all of that. I would say also, look, the magic of JavaScript is that you can run all kinds of cool tracking stuff client side and scrape all kinds of data. That doesn't necessarily change. And with a headless approach.
Yeah, what's important about that is that's a good answer for analytics, but that's also a good answer for a lot of things with headless. It always depends on the developer, and that's the good and the bad. Like, you can improve your performance with headless, but you can also not if you didn't have a bad.
That's a really good point, because there are a lot of headless vendors out there that sell headless as sort of magic beans, that if you just use them, that it'll all of a sudden your site will be faster and you'll grow your hair back and you'll have a faster car and all the rest of it. And it, as Lone said, it depends. It's not necessarily. It's all about the execution, man. Okay, let's keep going. I'd be interested in knowing what kind of composable innovations are coming out this year for BigCommerce. I know on the product marketing team, you have more visibility into our roadmap and go to market on what's happening. So talk to the audience a little bit about, for BigCommerce merchants and developers working on our platform, what are some things they will see in 2023? Yeah,
so we're going to be doing a lot more partnerships, more with companies like Uniform, but more like that, where we want to partner with the DXPs, or DXCs rather, and DXPs, but we want to be involved with a lot of agency-built accelerators. We want to be making sure that we're really enabling composable commerce really plays into our strategy as a company, where we're open SaaS. We're working with a lot of different vendors to kind of, everybody kind of builds up and builds this ecosystem of opportunities. So we're trying to, if you're watching right now and you are an agency and you're building an accelerator, we want to try and find ways to work with you and elevate your work. We just started working on this thing called, I teased it out at the Partner Summit, but the Building Blocks Initiative. But all that is just like a test and learn environment for headless starters, we call them, but like just your headless front ends. You build out an accelerator. We want to make sure that we can elevate that. And on that, one of the other things is like pushing things to the edge, using Loan pointed out Vercel, but pushing sites more towards Vercel, Netlify, really using the leaning on like deployments, the deploy button to make sure that we can launch POCs really quickly. And then really kind of playing into some of the ecosystem partnerships that are available. Headless CMS. I just got back from Jamstack just now. And there's a lot of headless CMSs coming up, trying to find their way of differentiating with each other. And we're trying to play in, and we're trying to make sure that we enable them to do that and help elevate some of their work.
Perfect. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I know we have more questions than we can possibly answer, but we'll be at double the allotted time, I think, by the time we wrap here. So we've got to put a pin in it somewhere, I'm afraid. So with that note, Loan, where can people find you if they want to learn more? If there are questions that folks in the audience have for you specifically or for Trellis, how do they get in contact with you?
Well, for starters, add me on LinkedIn, but I'm also I try to be active on Twitter. I could probably do a better job at it, but you can add me on Twitter. That's what I use for professional stuff. And GitHub. I mean, I'm a software engineer at heart. I just kind of landed a director job by chance. But you guys can find me on GitHub, and I'm still fairly active on there. I try to be. So if you've got some cool open source stuff, love to look at it. Perfect.
Ben, what about you? And I guess the corollary would be, you mentioned Jamstack conference, but what kind of developer events is BigCommerce going to be at over the next several months?
Yeah, so we kind of wrapped up our two big events for the year that we're always involved in. Next.js Conf, which was a couple weeks ago, and then Jamstack Conf, which just ended. There will be a little bit of a holiday break, but in the early part in 2023, we'll be involved in a lot of Vue events, anything related to React. VueConf, I believe, is in March. We'll be involved with that, and Gatsby Conf, and anything that is related to, as Loan pointed out, Next.js, the composable ecosystem of headless partners. There's a lot of different, either the partners building out, like Content Stack does an event in May. We want to make sure that we're really out there involved in these communities, and I think composable kind of really plays into that community built growth. So
perfect.
Yeah.
Excellent. And I'll say that for me, if anybody does want to talk to me, which is doubtful, but it's possible, I have the same answer that Loan does, which is that I am also on LinkedIn. Please add me. I'm also on Twitter. Please feel free to follow me. I am not on GitHub because something has gone horribly wrong if I am writing production code. Thank you for your time, especially Loan. Thank you for staying up super late to join us. Please, for folks who have the questions, send those to us directly. We'll love to answer them one-on-one or collectively if we can, or if there are other questions that you come up with. Obviously, if you're a developer and you're going to one of the conferences that Ben mentioned, please hit us up. I'm sure we will have swag at these events and some knowledgeable people to speak with. And thanks for your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.